Order, order. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session of the Welsh Affairs Select Committee. My name's Ruth Jones and I'm chair of the committee. And I'm delighted today to say we have an extra guest on our panel, on our committee. Claire Hanna is joining us from the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. So thank you very much for joining us today, Claire. Much appreciated. And today we're going to be investigating the impact of the closure of the Holyhead port on the UK, Welsh and local trade and business, and exploring the strategic importance of Holyhead and facilitating trade between the UK, the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And on our panel, we have our distinguished panel in front of us today, and I want to say thank you to you gentlemen for coming in person to see us. We've got a lot to get through, so as usual I'm going to make a plea for short questions and short answers, and our committee members will target who they want to answer the particular questions, so I think that should be okay. Could I start by asking you all to very briefly introduce yourselves? Can I start left to right, my left to right? Dr. Edward Jones, please.
Thank you. Dr. Edward Thomas Jones, Senior Lecturer in Economics at Bangor University.
Good afternoon, I'm Gary Pritchard and I'm the leader of Ynys County Council.
Good afternoon, my name's Ian Davies from Stena Ports Limited.
Good afternoon, my name's Howard Browse, Chair of Cybi Business Forum and a business owner in Holyhead.
Brilliant, thank you very much, that's great. Good to see you. So I suppose my first question would be in terms of Stena line, how well prepared was the Holyhead port for Storm Dara? December the 6th and 7th, obviously. And what warnings did you get, and what sort of precautions were you able to take in order to mitigate the worst of the disaster, if you like? If I go to Stena, is that okay?
Okay. So obviously we had plenty of warning. We have full exposure for weather forecasts. Just to clarify, today I'm speaking as the port operator. I can't speak on behalf of the ferry companies and so forth, just to make that particular point. So the weather forecast is well known. From a week inwards, we get updates on what that weather forecast is. Both ferry operators have their own weather forecast, but it was well known of the weather that was coming.
So in terms of that, what sort of specific precautions were you able to take, or did you take?
We update the ferry operators who update us on regards to their sailing schedules and so forth. But weather is part of the day-to-day business of the ports on the Irish Sea. It is not unusual that we have weather several times a year. We have storms coming through.
This time was different, wasn't it? Because obviously the port was closed for 6 weeks. So why did it take so long to reopen?
Yeah, well, if I can make a comment on that. Yeah, so on the 6th and 7th of December, there were 2 berthing incidents at Holyhead port. Subsequent to that, it rendered the ferry terminals inoperable. And those ferry terminals didn't reopen, or partially reopen, until the 16th of January. Those incidents are now subject to an insurance claim, and I can give no further details without prejudicing that insurance claim at this time, I'm afraid.
Very frustrating for us, but obviously we understand where you're coming from with that. I'm going to hand over to Claire Hughes, please.
Thank you, Chair. A question for you then, Mr. Davies. But going on from that, given what we know about the increased frequency of severe storms and weather incidents, what will you do differently in the future to better protect the port?
Like all things, we will review what's happened. Our focus currently is getting the port reopened, but we will review our operating parameters in line with the ferry operators and make appropriate changes if we think it's necessary.
Is there a timescale for that review, or any kind of terms of reference being set for that?
I say our focus currently is, our initial focus is reopening one of the berths. Our focus now is getting that second berth back open. But yeah, when it is appropriate, we will take that review with the ferry operators.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jill German, please.
Diolch, Chair, and I'd like to direct my question to Dr. Jones, if I may, just on the UK economy. So the new UK government and indeed the Welsh government have made it really clear that economic growth and building the economy is one of the number one priorities. So I just wondered how important to the UK economy is the Port of Holyhead?
Thank you. I suppose there's various ways we could look at the importance of the port to the local economy, Welsh economy, and even the UK economy. I suppose the easiest place to start is with the jobs produced at the port. So in total, I think there's roughly around 580 jobs, and that are directly employed in the port by both Stena and Irish Ferries. If we look then, what are the jobs supported by the port through the supply chain, but also by people who are employed either directly through the port or through the supply chain, how they spend their money. We can use various multipliers for that. So a reasonable multiplier that we have for the local impact of the port is about 1.7. So we know there's roughly around 400 jobs in addition to those employed directly at the port that in the local area are dependent on the port. If we look at the UK level then, we have a multiplier of roughly 4. Again, that's reasonable looking at other ports in the UK. So we know at UK level, purely on Holyhead port, there's about 1,700 jobs dependent on this port. So it clearly has a big economic impact from a jobs perspective. If we think about exports from Wales then, we know that Ireland is the third in the top 3 trading partner with Wales. We have 2.5 billion of goods going from Wales directly to Ireland. Now, not all of them will go through Holyhead port, but the port does play an important role in transporting those goods as well. Also, when we think about North Wales economy, we know that manufacturing is important, and a lot of those exported goods would be manufacturing based, so it's a critical component of that.
And what do we know so far about the impact the port closure has had on UK trade? So we know that it's had the local impact with regards to jobs and services on Ynys, but do we have any indication of how it might have affected UK trade on the whole on that route?
I think it's too early to say. It's something we're still looking at. We know a lot of businesses have, particularly on the Irish side, have looked at alternative routes. However, we did hear similar kind of messages around during the time of Brexit, and they did revert back to using Holyhead port. So I suspect it'll take us a few months before we're able to say for certain the impact that has had.
Thank you.
Hannah, please.
Thank you very much. Holyhead's obviously vital for supply chains, not just for the UK, but between Britain and Ireland. So the task force is very welcome, and all of the work to find new routes probably just underlined how much movement of people and goods there is still between the islands and the continuing scale of interdependence. Can you quantify how important Holyhead is for trade between the UK and the Republic of Ireland, and where does responsibility lie for the future resilience of Holyhead in particular? And I might direct that to you, Ian. Thanks.
Yeah, if you look at Holyhead port itself, there are kind of 3 connections directly to Dublin, either from the Mersey-Liverpool region, either from Holyhead itself, or down the south, what we call the southern corridor between Fishguard and Pembroke into Rosslare. And I would say Holyhead is probably on a par with the Liverpool. So it is it is one of the big routes into that port. If you look at quantity-wise, it is approximately just under 1.5 million passengers a year, and I clarify passengers include car passengers, foot passengers, and freight lorry drivers. It is approximately 400,000 cars and approximately 400,000 freight units per annum. Now, those figures did go backwards considerably during Brexit, but they have been rebuilding again. So that's just a rough approximation of quantify what sort of scale of operation the Holyhead port is.
And in terms of investment in the port, I mean, where does Stena see its responsibility for that, or is that, in financing it? Is that a UK government or a Welsh government, or is that a...
No, sorry, just for clarity, Stena Line is a private company.
They're an operator. they operate that port? Do they? That's what I'm trying to
sorry.
understand. Who's responsible for the future resilience and the investment?
Okay, so the port is owned by Stena Line Ports, and just for clarity, there are two ferry companies that operate into the port: Stena Line Ferries and Irish Ferries, who are equal competitors and customers of Stena Line Ports. So the port is a private entity, and it is our responsibility.
And thank you for clarifying that. Henry Tufnell, please.
I just wanted to follow up, because we've sort of established the importance of Holyhead, and we were in terms of the implications of the storm. So I wanted to ask, Ian, do you view this as sort of a one-off freak event? I mean, I noticed you used the words "if necessary" in terms of for the resilience point moving forward. Do you see this as sort of a one-off event that happens, and we have to deal with it, but ultimately this isn't going to be something that happens frequently? So we take the ramifications and move forward. Is that how you're viewing it as an organisation?
Sorry, could you just clarify the question again? Sorry.
So you used the words "if necessary" in respect of looking at the planning in terms of future from the effects of this severe weather, to the earlier question that was put to you. And we've established the importance of Holyhead from a trade point of view. So I was wondering whether you viewed this as a sort of one-off event, and that going forward we manage it, but if another event like this happens, that so be it, in terms of from your planning point of view.
Oh no, far from it. This is an exceptional event, and like any responsible port owner, we will undertake a review to see what lessons can be learned. Absolutely. So that has to be taken into consideration. We are, as a port operator, it is our role to make sure that these events don't happen, or happen as infrequently, but events do happen, and we need to make sure that we can minimise the potential of these events happening, firstly, and also minimise the consequential effects should they ever happen. That is one of the roles that we need to undertake.
And the 6-week period in terms of reopening, you don't view that as acceptable as part of the planning?
Well, we didn't plan to close the port for 6 weeks. It is a consequence of that event, yes.
Yeah, but you don't view that as in terms of acceptable, in terms of that length of period?
Well, any closure is unacceptable from a port's point of view. We understand our position as a port owner. It is our business. We want to keep that port open 24/7 every day of the week. That is our aim. That is our business. That's how we earn our revenue. So it is critically important that we are able to provide that as the port owner.
Thank you for that. Steve Witherden, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd also like to direct my question to Mr Davies, please. Since the UK left the EU, have alternative trade routes emerged to connect the European mainland to the Republic of Ireland that circumvent Holyhead? And if so, can we quantify the effect this aspect of Brexit has had on the Welsh economy?
So I'm sitting here as the port owner and operator, but I do know, yes. So more routes have opened from the Republic of Ireland direct to France and into the continent. Yes, that is a fact, and that happened around the time of Brexit. Yeah, there is greater demand on those corridors. Have we been able to quantify it? As the port operator, immediately before Brexit, we actually saw a stockpiling. So we actually saw an increase in the months leading up to the date. We then saw a very sharp decline for the first few months. Then there was a recovery, and that recovery was relatively quick, but it's still recovering. So from a low of after about 3 months, it was down. It was notable last year that the port and the ferry operators have really started to regain some of those lost volumes, but that may not be necessarily down to Brexit. It's very hard to pinpoint some of those, but I suspect some of it is to do with other ferry operations in the Mersey to Liverpool region, changes of tonnage and capacity. And also I think it's fair to say it's probably the freight haulage industry has adapted to those, but it's definitely taken its time, yes.
David Chadwick, please.
Another question for Ian and Dr. Jones. How strategically and economically important is Holyhead in linking Great Britain to Northern Ireland?
I think, it's extremely, and say it is one of the large corridors that connects Wales, UK to Ireland, it is, because of the shortness of the crossing and the frequency of the crossing, it adds a dynamic, especially to the just-in-times logistics industry, which perhaps other corridors don't have. So, no, I can't underemphasise how important it is, critical as part of that. But I would also say it is one part of that logistics chain. And the whole logistic chain, if you to stay back and look at it's the robustness of that logistics chain, Holyhead is just one part of that logistics chain. And I think there is other parts of that logistics chain that perhaps need reviewing as well, or considering for future as well.
Yeah, to add to that, I did try to find statistics to support the importance of Holyhead to trade with Northern Ireland. Unfortunately, the statistics aren't clear, so I can't make any comment on that. But looking at the infrastructure that's in place, I would agree with what was just said. The importance, just by looking at the infrastructure, is clear the role Holyhead Port has in that supply chain.
How much of the cargo that moves through Holyhead continues to Northern Ireland?
That's sorry.
Either of you. Yeah.
Sorry, that's what I'm not sure of from looking at the data. I wouldn't be able to filter out what's going to Northern Ireland and what's remaining in the Republic. But if we were able to get hold of that data, then I could answer that question.
Can I just comment on that? Of course, pre-Brexit, we as a port operator, there was no boundaries, so there was no understanding of those. Now there was a feeling and just sort of industry, but pre-Brexit it was felt that roughly a third of the cargo that went through Holyhead Port was destined to or came from Northern Ireland because of its short link between Northern Ireland, Dublin and into the UK logistics sector. Approximately one third, and that was pre-Brexit. How that now plays out, I can't give a feeling to, but that's roughly the quantum we were looking at the time.
You mentioned just now about the fact that other areas, the supply chains and looking at the legs of the journey, if you like. You said other things need to be considered. What else do you think needs reviewing?
If you look at the logistics flow, obviously Anglesey is an island, and that for me is the obvious one. That it's that link to UK, Wales, and then that crossing of the Severn Bridge. There is infrastructure there. This is two bridges which are 200 years old. And I think that is obviously a key, and they're both single carriageway. So in high winds, the bridge is closed. In the event of a road traffic accident, the bridge is closed, and we are very reliant on that. That's perhaps one. The A55, the dualling of the road across the island, was very successful, and it made a huge difference, but the last half mile was never completed, and I think perhaps that's something also, not only from a robustness of that logistics, but also probably for the quality of the people who live in the locality, that perhaps something else that needs considering as well, amongst other things, just off the top of my head.
Thank you for that. Sorry, David, back to you.
Thank you. Question for Gary and Ian again. Have you observed any benefits to Ynys Môn since Holyhead was granted Freeport status?
Not as yet. Obviously, the tax sites have only just been noted, so we are working towards what we hope will be a redevelopment of the area. We've seen, obviously, the old Rio Tinto site bought by Stena, which has been demolished and completely cleaned and ready to be used as a site as part of the Freeport. Obviously, it's too early to say it as yet. To see those benefits, we can only foresee what's coming rather than say, yes, we've seen an actual benefit.
Comment. I would say, there is work, relatively small scale work currently underway, but I think what the Freeport has done is raise the opportunities on Anglesey. It's also perhaps highlighted some of the problems that the community has and the local economy has, but it has raised the prospects of opportunities on Anglesey, and hopefully it's our role as a Freeport now to capitalise on those, to bring those benefits to the community.
So would you be able to say if the port is on track to meet the target of creating 3,500 to 13,000 jobs by 2030?
I think the target of jobs is something that we need to be careful about. I don't think we want to be over-promising. The people of Anglesey have been over-promised many things in the past decade, and it's it's tiring for the people to be overpromised. I think it's important that we are realistic in our targets. We are talking about an area which has seen a lot of closures, factories closing, job prospects minimal, seeing our young people leaving the island, which is why the Freeport offers, as Ian says, opportunities for us to ensure that our young people are able to stay on the island, that we are able to work on the island, don't have to move away. We've got an island which has got a very ageing population. We're seeing young people moving out, older people retiring to the island. This is the kind of challenges that we have as an authority, and the Freeport gives us the opportunity to face those challenges head on by securing good job opportunities for our youngsters.
Andrew Ranger, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to look at the importance of regional Welsh trade in terms of Holyhead. So to Dr Jones and Mr Browse, how important is Holyhead port to the Welsh economy, and particularly in comparison to ports such as Milford Haven and Port Talbot?
Again, it's certainly an important part of that trade. We know that Ireland's an important trading partner for Wales. It's been consistently in the top 3 in terms of trading countries. 2.5 billion of goods went over in 2023. Some of them will be going through Holyhead Port, not all of them, but there will be a large proportion. And also in terms of tourism, we know that many tourists use the ferries at Holyhead. They will be spending money locally. That happens both ways. We have tourists going over to Ireland. They will stop on their way over to Anglesey, but also we get tourists from Ireland visiting Anglesey, so it's an important part there. Now, how we quantify that, it's I wouldn't be able to say for certain the economic impact, but we can go look at again those number of jobs locally. We are looking at 986, nearly enough to 1,000 jobs dependent on that port and local, and then an additional 1,600, 1,700 jobs at a national level dependent on the port.
Okay, thank you. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, in terms of, I think you've got to understand Holyhead, it's a port, and there's a number of businesses around it, but it is seasonal in some ways as well. And certainly in terms of what we call the visitor economy, it's a period between normally Easter and October when we do see a lot of visitors, and especially overseas visitors as well, visiting the town, either staying in the port, either side of the trip to and from Ireland. I think in terms of what we're talking about the closure period, the closure was particularly pertinent for businesses because it overlapped with Christmas, and that would be sort of quite a busy period, yeah, during sort of the quieter off-season. So certainly in terms of some of the hospitality businesses, they really noted it because they lost a lot of the Christmas bookings. Yeah, so it's especially pertinent for them at that period in time. But yeah, I mean, I do say, I think you've got to recognise Holyhead does service the visitor economy, yeah, but it is seasonal.
Okay, no, thank you very much.
Up to that, sorry, I think.
Of course, yeah, of course.
I think I know the question was regarding trade, but I don't think we can underplay the tourism element. Obviously, Anglesey is a tourist destination. Tourist economy is very, very important to us as an island, and I think, as Howard was saying, you get the visitors from either side, so either travelling over to Ireland, will stay on Anglesey for a few days beforehand or on the way back. You know, anecdotally, growing up in Holyhead, we knew the number of plates of cars from Germany, from Holland, from wherever, because there were so many overseas visitors. I don't think that can be underplayed either in the discussions about the port's importance to the island.
Absolutely. No,
I'd just add as well, certainly in terms of the statistics I've got, sort of nearly a quarter of overseas visitors from the United States. Yeah, so obviously there's the link with Ireland that way.
Great, thank you. And do we have a heat map maybe of in terms of the trade and well the travel that goes through Holyhead Port of where it either originates from in Wales or goes to in Wales? So I imagine obviously there's a lot of trade that I imagine goes down the A55 route, may stop off along the North Wales coast to businesses there, or may carry on through to Dover and on the land bridge, or does it go elsewhere in Wales? Do you have an idea of how it distributes from Holyhead?
Yeah, I'm afraid I wouldn't have statistics on that. But again, thinking what Wales exports, we know that machinery equipment is a big exporter from Wales. And if we consider North Wales economy, we know that manufacturing plays an important part of that economy. Therefore, I could imagine that a large part of that did come from the region.
Right, okay. In terms of outgoing, I know I travel on the Holyhead train back from London, most weeks, and it's on Thursday night it's really busy. There's a lot of people on the way to Holyhead. I think, obviously, I'm guessing to go to Ireland. I don't know. Do we have an idea of the reverse way in terms of stuff going into Holyhead, where it's coming from? It's probably the same question in reverse, really, but
yeah, those statistics are available. Unfortunately, I do not have them at hand.
Okay. Is there any chance you maybe could send them to us if you got them?
Can I just... There is a new piece of work we're looking at using the BT Active Intelligence data. And it's a new piece of work using the Smart Towns project. And information such as that we can collect moving forward, because it does show from where people originated and when they came in the town. But we're not that far into the project as yet, right. Actually see that information. But there is work underway to look at it.
Right. Well, that'd be really interesting, actually, to see the outcome of that. And then just to add to that, thinking of the infrastructure I'm thinking of North West England and North Wales, that whole infrastructure going across. So I know we have touched on it on the previous question in terms of the A55, but also rail as well. What improvements in that linkage would be the best things to actually help Holyhead, Hollywood Port, I was going to say, Holyhead Port prosper in the future, and obviously linking into the Freeport developments as well?
I think
to anybody.
I think we've touched on the obvious one, which is the bridges. The resilience of the bridges is vital to us as an island. I know we had a discussion in the Islands Forum when we met with Scottish Islands, who claimed we weren't a real island because we were so close to the mainland, which is, yes, we are close to the mainland, which means we get the best of both worlds. So we have access to emergency services, the hospital, the university, which is a big employer just over the bridge on the mainland. So we do share those services with the mainland, but of course we then get the worst of both worlds if the bridges are not open, because we then don't have access to those, and the resilience of the bridges is vital, not just for transport links to the port, transport links to the Freeport, but also just for the resilience of the island as a whole. When we saw Storm Dara, we call it the new bridge, but it is 200 years old. We saw the new bridge closed, and we saw lorries trying to get over the old bridge, which caused all manner of problems. And the worry on the island is that could mean that emergency services couldn't get on or off the island, whether it's taking someone to hospital or a fire engine coming onto the island. So it's the resilience of the bridges, and not just in terms of the port, but as the resilience of the island as a whole.
Can I just pick up on Ian's point in terms of the A55 not being finished? In terms from a local community point of view, Holyhead can become a bit of a bottleneck at times in terms of the volume of freight coming to. And it does make it difficult. In fact, if you talk to a lot of the locals, they knew not to move around when the ferries were coming in and out. But it is something that needs to be considered in terms of the town moving forward, and certainly if the port's going to develop any further.
And just finally, just on that point, would you be aware or do you understand that any effective bottlenecks, such as further down the A55, perhaps nearer the Wrexham Chester end, or at Crewe Station, for example, or Chester Station, that might have an impact on the port in terms of delay in traffic both ways? Is that a noticeable effect that anyone could identify?
I don't think there's anything that stands out. Obviously, from our perspective, the bottlenecks are at both ends of the A55 on the island, be that the bridge leading into the port or the two bridges leading off the island.
Yeah. Mr. Davies, would you?
Yeah, could I just comment on, and I hark back to the point that Holyhead is unique in the role it plays in this just-in-time logistics chain between the two economies. And the ferries are so large in Holyhead that there are times at night time, that these will come in probably with around 4 or 5 kilometres of freight back to back, and they're onto the UK network. So any kind of bottleneck on that crossing has a ripple effect, not only for the port, but for the island in its entirety, because there is no other way to get off the island. So delays, closures of those bridges it can't be underplayed, really.
It's all about the bridges, really, is what you're saying?
No, it's all about the whole logistics chain. And I think, I respect today we hear about the port, but it's also, for myself, it's the robustness of that logistics chain, and also perhaps the robustness of Welsh ports. What other parts can Welsh ports play when these situations do happen? I think that perhaps is also worth considering as well in future.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
I'll come back to that in a minute. Anne Davies, please.
Diolch yn fawr. Just a quick comment, really. I think the smart towns system is working really well, and so much information that we can get from that across the whole of Wales, which help businesses, tailor their opening times and knowing exactly when that footfall is coming into your town is so important, isn't it? And I know perhaps you've touched on this, but I'll ask Mr Browse first, and then we'll go to Mr Pritchard. The port has been described as the beating heart of Holyhead, and we know it is. So how economically significant for Ynys Môn is Holyhead Port?
Are you thinking about it from a business perspective in terms of their local economy?
No, the business and local economy, because both are intrinsically linked, really.
I mean, obviously, the port is a significant employer in the town, and I think most families who live in Holyhead will have some connection with the port in some way. In terms of the businesses, again, it's providing for the different types of market, isn't it? Yeah, because obviously a lot of the time during the tourism season, we're responding to the visitor economy. Yeah, and certainly in terms of the busy peak season, there's a significant number of visitors come through Holyhead in the town. So that they either stay in the chain hotels or the independents that are in the town. And certainly during the summer season, you'll be lucky to get a room. Yeah. In terms of there's such a demand. And then of course you've got the spin-offs in terms of the pubs, the restaurants, the cafes, etc. that service it. So I mean, in terms of, I would say the hospitality economy is very dependent on the visitor economy. In terms of the retailers and some of the other businesses, obviously they rely a lot on the local trade, because it's not often that people on the ferries, will come into the town. Yeah, some may, some might not, and it depends on what the business is. Certainly, I know in terms of for the information look at the moment, the retail park is very heavily used. Yeah, by people coming on off the ferries, and I think also to a certain extent by some of the freight drivers as well now. I mean, it's the beating heart of the town. Yeah, it probably is the beating heart of the town. Yeah, but it's not just the town. Yeah. But the town is quite reliant on it, and therefore anything that affects the port, has a knock-on effect for all the businesses.
John.
Yeah, diolch. I think the town of Holyhead exists because of the port, and in a town of 12,000 people, to have 600 jobs directly employed in the port shows how important it is. We've had, as a County Council, we have had a survey for local businesses to give us their impact of how the closure of the port has affected them, and it's affected more businesses than we ever may have considered. The array of businesses that are affected by the closure of the port, not just the truck garages, logistics companies, the hospitality trade. These are all the obvious businesses that we may have thought. We spoke to a restaurant who saw the number of covers that they had over the month of December just collapse. They hadn't even realised that they had so much business coming to the restaurant of passengers who were on their way to the port or on their way from the port. But when the port closed, that impact was instantly felt. So we've spoken to pubs in the town who, because Stena did everything within their gift to ensure that the freight kept moving, which meant that the Stena staff moved to Birkenhead or Fishguard, and then the town was left without, not just without the port and the passengers coming through the port, but without the staff that live in the town that would normally be having a pint in the evening or going to the shops. to do their weekly shops. So, you know, the effect on the town of not having the port open was more than just the passengers moving in and out. Things that we may not consider straight away became obvious to us how much the town and the island depends on the port, and it's quite startling how many different businesses, you know, from retail, for footfall in the town going down, to logistics, beauty parlours even, you know, because the staff in the town weren't there. They'd moved up to Birkenhead or Fishguard to work. So, yeah, as a lad who grew up in Holyhead, you know, it's always been there, and it was quite odd not to see ships coming in and out. And it was almost comforting in January to see Irish number plates again, but it did show how much it impacts on the town.
My second question was about jobs, really, but that's already been answered by Dr. Jones. So I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball here towards you. I hope you don't mind, Chair. I hope you don't mind. Do you think that being part of the Customs Union would help businesses in Holyhead and really secure the port of Holyhead? You can go along, yes or no. It doesn't have to be a long answer, just a yes or no.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to point, Holyhead Port is secure. I'd just like to make that point, irrespective of the Customs Union. Can I just also refer to your last question? I think it's a point. I'm South Walian, born and bred. I've worked in Holyhead for 20 plus years. What I have noticed is, and we are always conscious of this, and Gary, we are a big part of the town and a big part of the community. We were one of the big employers. The island has lost a lot of the other big employers. So relatively speaking, our position has probably grown as importance because we've lost the nuclear power station, and more recently we've lost the chicken processing factory. So relatively speaking, the port hasn't changed, but it has grown its importance to the local economy, I would say, in that one. Going back to your question on Brexit and pre-EU, I think the answers speak for themselves about what happened to trade before and after. And I would say businesses have adapted, but anything from it was so easy to do trade prior to that to afterwards, it has added complexity. It has added cost, without a doubt, because the administrative element now for the freight haulier, somebody has to pick that cost up. So anything that adds that to trade is always detrimental to that trade, I think would be my overarching kind of feeling on it.
Yeah, and for those very reasons, I think, you know, the fact that trade between the UK and the EU is now overly complicated inevitably has an impact on businesses and the amount of freight that travels through our ports, be they from Wales to Ireland or be they from England to France or England to Holland. I think it's inevitable that, you know, rejoining the Customs Union would make trade far easier and by implication would see more trade.
I'll keep my answer short. Yes.
Yeah. And the reason I ask is because in as part of our pack, of course, you know, it shows there that most of our trade is with Europe, not the US. You know, we tend to look elsewhere, but most of our trade is on our doorstep. So that's the simple reason why I asked. So diolch yn fawr.
I think just on that one as well, if you look at, especially pre-Brexit, how the supermarkets viewed Britain and Ireland, they saw it as one market. There was no boundaries. It was all part of the logistics chains from their warehousing to their delivery. Yeah. That was how they viewed it. There was no border, effectively, and that has changed. And I think the other thing, on reflection about this, is businesses do adapt. But what is noticeable and maybe the haulage industry is better placed to comment on this, is that the smaller freight operator, the one-man driver, the family business, generally has been throttled, perhaps is a fair comment to say, because they don't have the time or the resource to adapt, and therefore the bigger players have got bigger, the smaller players have been perhaps forced out of that market.
That's, yeah, well, we could spend another session looking all about the impacts of, but we won't be going there today. Thank you, gentlemen. Councillor Gary Pritchard, you mentioned earlier on about a survey that you've undertaken with local... Is that publicly available?
It's not at present. The closing date was on the 31st of January, so the council officers are still evaluating the data that's come in. It's part of our evidence to Welsh Government in the hope of gaining some sort of hardship fund for the businesses that have been impacted. I'm sure once the data is available, we can make sure that you get a copy.
That would be very helpful. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to Henry Tufnell, please.
Well, it's just building off the topic of the survey. Were you satisfied with the level of response? Were you able to quantify that financial impact to businesses through the survey?
The responses we had varied because we didn't ask for specific, we just asked for an idea of the impact. As I say, this is part of our evidence gathering to put forward to the Welsh Government to prove that there has been an impact on businesses. But a truck service garage on the island, as you may imagine, would be more impacted than many. They said the impact could anything between 50,000 and 100,000 for the 6 weeks that the port was closed. We've had hoteliers who have had to, well, basically had no bookings throughout the month of December. I think one of the starkest statistics from what we've gathered so far is that 54% of the businesses who have replied fear that there's jobs at risk if the port doesn't return to its two-berth operation. And 95% of the businesses who replied are worried that we are seeing the 16th of January, the opening of one berth, as celebration day, everything's back to normal. That's far from it, because the way that the port operates at the moment with less time between sailings means the fewer opportunities of foot passengers going into the town. There's less time between sailings. So yeah, a huge percentage are worried that we see the 16th of January as the be-all and end-all, rather than that is just one step along the journey to getting the port back to normal.
Can I just add, there is a case study as well which has been put together by Mentamon and the Smart Towns team. And there's two parts to it. Obviously, we've got all the statistical data from what BT told us in terms of footfall in town is up and down, or certainly decreased for the December period. Also, it touches on a bit about when people visit, but also where they come from as well, and the demographic spend in the town. And it does look at some of the anecdotal evidence as well in terms of what businesses have said to us. As Gary's probably mentioned, the hotel, 17-bedroomed hotel, which had literally few bookings at all during the December period. Also the guest houses, which saw the bookings collapse over the December period, and the impact it's had on some of the restaurants and some of the takeaways and the pubs, etc. So that case study is available and it has been published. Yep.
Thank you very much. Ben Lake, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this afternoon. If I may ask some questions of Mr Davies, if that's all right. And it's to do with the contingency routes that were established in light of the storm, and of course, particular interest in Fishguard and Goodick, but appreciate there were other routes as well. Could you just explain how difficult it was to establish these contingency routes in light of Storm Dara?
Yeah, there's... As I said, there's a ferry berth in Pembroke, there's one in Fishguard, and then so I can only comment on Fishguard because it's a Stena Line port. From the ferry operators and the port owners, the first thing we have to do is make sure that we can physically get ships in. So there's that element, and as a port we are looking, or we have looked already, at the robustness of Fishguard and what investment is needed, and we are down that path, and that maybe that's part of the bigger discussion about the robustness of Welsh ports to deal with these in future. Then the next step for us is again, it's a legacy perhaps of Brexit, is that you then need to, previously we could move a ship and start a new route. Now we have to have a liaison with HMRC and with Border Force about opening up through cargo declaration systems. They have to create temporary routes. So that's one aspect. Then the second aspect is, because of the border, then Border Force need to make sure that they have sufficient manpower and things in place before you start moving ships. So that was a step that we never had to do before. We have very good cooperation, and it was new to many parties. But I have to say, through good dialogue, we could adapt fairly quickly, but it was a process that was new to all parties, and we did get through it. But it's something that we have learned that perhaps we didn't appreciate so much previously.
And during the period of the closure of Holyhead, if we just look at Fishguard for a moment, how many extra crossings were you able to establish and with that temporary route?
Yeah, so Fishguard normally has 2 crossings a day to Ireland. With one ship, we were managed to accommodate a Stena Line ferry and an Irish ferry. Both did services to Dublin, so we doubled the number of sailings we could accommodate. I don't have the numbers to hand, but the amount of freight went up immeasurably during that period. So again, perhaps lessons learned for us how we better deal with that, and we already have ideas about investment and robustness. But it was a big step change.
It's interesting as well because you mentioned the Irish ferries also operated a few crossings out of Fishguard. With all of the additional work required to facilitate the additional crossings, did it come to a significant cost? If you're at liberty to say.
Not so much to deal with this current situation. What it did need was considerable goodwill on behalf of staff, which I'm really grateful for. So the ability, it was coming up to Christmas and we were asking staff, could they relocate to Birkenhead or to Fishguard? People have families, people have other commitments, so a lot of goodwill. So for the record, I'd like to thank staff that enabled that. That was probably our biggest initial challenge, was to make sure that we had sufficient manpower to make those changes. But then there are other learnings about how we can make perhaps the infrastructure in Fishguard better able to cope with these larger ships, to turn them around into times. And we have plans, and we will move forward with those plans now.
That's very interesting and good to hear as the MP for Fishguard and Goodwick. To all witnesses now, there's a lot of discussion during the period of closure of the Port of Holyhead that haulage companies in particular would have to start making alternative arrangements, and as with everything, there are a lot of arrangements that come along with that with regards to the placement of drivers and different routes, what have you. Is there any concern at all that the period of closure might see hauliers either stick to other temporary routes, from Fishguard as an example, or others, and is that a cause of concern when we consider the future of Holyhead? So if I don't know who'd like to go first. I've picked on Mr Davies already, so perhaps Dr Jones.
Thank you. I would have some concerns. Messages I hear from businesses in Ireland is that they want security over those supply routes, and therefore if it entails additional travel time to get goods to the Republic of Ireland, they're willing to endure that extra time if there is guarantee. So it's that certainty that they're after, and that's what we now need to show with Holyhead Port, that there is the port is fully prepared for such events in the future, that we can guarantee transport through the port.
Thank you. Councillor Pritchard.
I think to extol the virtues of Holyhead as a port, it is geographically closest to Ireland. As Ian has mentioned, it makes sense for the ferry operators because they can operate ferries quicker, far more frequently between Dublin and Holyhead. I think it's important to have that confidence in the port, which I hope, as Ian has said, that the port is secure. We can share that confidence. I do know that the relocating of wagons, for example, did lead to a lot of job losses with an agency who deal with agency drivers. So the drivers were based in Holyhead, but the wagons then would move to the Midlands, and that caused a lot of logistical problems for the agency, who then had to lay off staff just before Christmas. Hopefully the confidence in the port will bring those wagons back, and I'm sure anecdotally the wagons are coming back. But I think also from an Ynys Môn perspective, and rightly or wrongly, whether it's a fair perception or not, there was a perception that there wasn't much notice taken of the port being closed. for example, I couldn't tell you how many times I was asked to make a comment to an Irish newspaper or an interview to RTE or Talk Radio in Ireland, for example, whereas the media coverage in the UK was limited to just Welsh media. And I think, rightly or wrongly, the perception was that it wasn't taken seriously, that the port was closed for such a length of time. You know, you would often walk down Holyhead or speak to businesses in Holyhead, and the retort would be, well, can you imagine if this was Folkestone, or can you imagine if this was Harwich? It would be all over the news, but they're not seeing it on the news, so they don't feel it's being taken seriously. And I think having that actual being taken notice of, whether it, you know, I appreciate that transport has devolved, but it's a port that's of national, it's a piece of national infrastructure. It's of vital importance strategically, not just to Ynys, not just to Wales. It's Ireland, the UK, and Europe. It's a European route, and I think that having this committee today and having this attention put on the port should be able to give that confidence, not only to the people of Holyhead, as well as what Ian has already mentioned, that the port is secure, but also to businesses to know that there is a light being shone on what happened and lessons are being learnt, and we are moving forward and the port will be secure. And I think that was one of the biggest challenges during the port closure, was people saying, well, they don't care, nobody's taken any notice of us. But hopefully with this, you know, the moving forward, we can rebuild that confidence in the port.
Mr. Browers, and then I'll come to Mr. Davies.
I think Gary sort of basically expressed it. I think it's confidence moving forward. Businesses need confidence that obviously it was a big shock to them, yeah, because port closed, we didn't know how long to start with, and therefore it's a bit of a shock to the system. So moving forward, I think the businesses want to be confident that the routes that they're used to the freight and the passengers using in terms of the port infrastructure is sound, yeah. And I think to a certain extent, and I appreciate it's difficult for Stena, one of the concerns at the moment is as we get busier, as we move in sort of what we'd call basically the tourist season, whether the port infrastructure is up to coping, yeah, with what's going to be increased demand. Because certainly from the hospitality point of view, if the international visitors see that the routes that they've traditionally used are not there, they'll look for alternative routes, which will then have a knock-on effect on other businesses in the town as well.
Thank you. Mr. Davies, I know you'll have more direct contact with some of the hauliers that use the port, and have you picked up on any sort of intention or discussions that hauliers are thinking again about their routes, and that they are perhaps looking at other, well, perhaps making use of the temporary routes on a more permanent basis?
What was really interesting, and it was as we kind of expected, once Holyhead reopened, it was like a tap opening again. They will switch back because logistically it makes sense, economically it makes sense, it gives something that other ports can't give. We don't take that for granted, don't get me wrong, but it is noticeable how quick those logistics chains switch back to their known suppliers. So we are confident, but not overly confident, you know, in the future. We don't take it for granted. But, you know, since we've reopened on the 16th, those volumes have returned virtually to the levels we would expect them to turn. I would also kind of, the opening on the 16th of one berth of the two berths, but all the ferry operators are operating the same vessels and the same number of departures now. So that capacity is there in a slightly different format. Before, because of the nature of competition, the ferries operated basically in pairs at the same time, so we had peaks. So now we have, in effect, a ferry departure every 3 hours. So the capacity is there, but it is in a different profile before. But our focus is to get that second berth open, which adds robustness and resilience. And that has always been our aim for day one. Just also comment as well is the fact, you know, we talk about what's happened. I think also reflect, you know, Stena ports have owned Holyhead for 30 years. We have invested in that time. we will continue to invest. And I think also the ferry operators have invested in time and grown their business. That's what businesses do. And they will continue to invest because they all believe in this particular corridor. So, Brexit was a setback. Things have adjusted. People will rebuild those chains. And I think Holyhead has a very, very bright future.
Thank you.
Before I bring in Ynys Medi, can I just ask Mr Davies, you mentioned a couple of times about the robustness of Welsh ports, and you mentioned it a couple of times. Is that a concern?
I think we recognise that to move ferries around physically is not an easy thing to do. We recognise that as a port operator. We are taking steps to address it, but there are things, this ship-shore interface that needs to be, in Fishguard, it needs investment, and we're taking steps. So there are when things, or if hopefully things don't go wrong, but when they do go wrong, how we are able as a port sector to offer something else to the market, which adds to not only Holyhead's robustness, but Wales PLC's robustness to offer these alternatives, I think is also important, and he's reflecting as well, perhaps.
Thank you very much. Ynys Medi, please.
Yeah, and can I thank you for being here today. My question is more about the UK government and the government's response. But I think what is important that we say at the beginning, as the member for Ynys Môn, is that Stena has always been a good neighbour for the town of Holyhead, and the small businesses has been a good neighbour to Stena. Everything's worked in partnership, and what it has given is confidence for a lot of entrepreneurs to start off their own businesses. And with SMEs, over 95% of the Welsh economy is small businesses. It shows you how important the linkage between a big company like yourself is with the local supply chain. But I must say that maybe something that hasn't been touched that I don't want to dwell too long, and it is the personal impact on those businesses and their ability to overcome this. And that's why I'm going on to the UK government support and actually the hardship fund. And this is more of a lesson for other areas as well. And as we saw during COVID, how business support is able to be put in when things go wrong, and should there be a policy in place when things go on wrong anywhere in the country, that it's possible to have a support or a hardship mechanism that can support those businesses. So my first question, and this is to the four of you, so you'll all have different slants, I think, to this, is what support did the UK government provide to those businesses that lost income as a consequence to the port closure? And maybe I'll start with you, Howard, because you were directly impacted as a business owner there as well.
What support has been provided or should be provided?
No, the question is, has been provided, yeah.
None as yet. Well, not to my knowledge, certainly talking to the businesses in the town.
And what would you think that should? Because that is my next question, but maybe that...
I think certainly for some of the businesses, yes. And I think you've got to understand what might seem like a small loss to some businesses is a huge loss. Yeah, a small bed and breakfast, probably only 4 bedrooms, even a loss of £2,500 over a busy period, it's a lot of money for them. And I think also, talking to some of the businesses as well, it's where they are in their business life cycle. Some have probably just started, yeah, and to suffer a huge hit, yeah, 9-10 months into trading makes a big difference to them, and it takes some time to claw back that loss, yeah. And also then there's knock-on effects in terms of employment, sort of people hours being cut, and so yeah, I'm not aware of any supporters yet, but certainly some businesses have really struggled due to the port closure.
I think yourself, Ian, as a private port owner, have you felt that there is support there, even though that you are a private owner? Obviously, during that time, did you feel that there was support if needed?
Yeah, just for clarity, we have never asked for financial support regarding this closure, and neither will. We are a private port operator. It is one of the downsides of running your own business, but we took a long-term view, and this is the way we'll go forward. We haven't asked the Welsh Government, we haven't asked the UK Government. We have reached out and we have kind of always had a good dialogue with Cardiff when it comes to ports, because it is a devolved matter. And so throughout this, we have had a kind of onward-going dialogue with the ports team in Welsh Government, really about sort of their obviously they have questions about things like train passengers and logistics and what fish could do and so forth. So we have that onward going dialogue. That's as much as our kind of involvement has been really on a governmental level on this occasion.
Yeah, from our point of view as a local authority, not aware of any support. Although, as Howard said, we have started discussions with local businesses in order to assess the impact, so that we can provide evidence of the impact. I've said I'll send the details of the report along, but yeah, just to reiterate, I think the businesses have been impacted in a massive way. Some businesses who were looking forward to their first Christmas, only in business 9 or 10 months, looking forward to Christmas as that boost to their first year, and then the port closed in that first week in December, and their takings fell off the figurative cliff. There are other companies who have been severely impacted because they dealt in the logistics, they dealt in transport and truck services, but to my knowledge, no support has been offered.
Yeah, as same as everybody else here, I'm not aware of any support that has been given, or what discussions are going on regarding that, which is a surprise given, if we look at the other side, Republic of Ireland, I know there's discussion there between the government and the Irish Road Haulage Association on what financial support they need now because of the increased costs that they have incurred because of this. I think what's important is that we look at the survey, the different data that we have, so that we are able to build up a clear picture of what the impact has been, and then appropriate support is given to those businesses, because like Gary mentioned, a lot of them are young businesses that do require that support because of what's happened.
And I think moving on is what does that support look like, and I hope maybe it's not a question for today, but I think we would be keen to, after you've done that work, is what would that support look like for lessons learned to make sure that other areas, whatever it is, are supported in that way moving forward. I think that's the best way. And the next one is moving on to the Welsh Government and the task force. I think it was on the 7th of January it was announced that the task force would be put in place. So I'm just wondering how's that work going? How's the task force work going? How's the remit going? I will start there and I'll move on then.
Since the announcement, I haven't had any contact with regards to the task force. I have written to the Cabinet Secretary for Transport and North Wales of the Welsh Government on the 31st, just to welcome the task force and to ask what the task force will look like moving forward. But as of yet, I haven't had any contact with regards to the task force, what it will look at and how it will be composed.
Yeah, we did. I don't know if the task force is the same, but we did receive a letter yesterday from the Economy, Trade and Rural Affairs Committee wanting to build an evidence picture, but that's the only contact we've had in terms of the port closure on businesses.
Thank you. And Henry Tufnell.
I just had a follow-up question in respect of the support that Ynys was raised in respect of UK government. And I know that when the chair asked Ian at the beginning, you mentioned in respect of insurance claim restricted you from answering certain questions. I was wondering how, in terms of that insurance aspect of providing support to those businesses that need it as a result of this event, I'd be interested to hear about how businesses have been looking to claim that insurance.
Yeah, well, that will probably under our business continuity insurance, and I'm not sure to a certain extent whether it would be classed as an act of, in terms of the impact. It would need looking into. Certainly none of the businesses mentioned to me yet, they're going to go back to their insurers to claim for the loss of trade.
It's also difficult as well, because as we've mentioned, a lot of the businesses are impacted because of the closure of the port. It's an indirect impact. Whether the insurers would, had the roof blown off their business, it's a different matter, isn't it? But it's the port which their business relies on for customers that's been impacted. I'm not sure how their insurers would look at that, but I think that's each individual business would need to look at that and how their business is insured.
I don't know whether you had anything to add.
I think it's going to be very difficult. Like we said there, if it was a business that did have their roof blown off, you know, that's a very clear claim there because of the indirect nature, the indirect impact of the port. I'm not too sure how the insurances will be viewing that with small businesses.
Let me go back to Mr Davies. You mentioned earlier on about the two birthing incidents, which I know you can't talk about, but I just want to, are they directly related to Storm Dara? Are they separate? And in terms of Terminal 3, when's that going to reopen?
All I can reiterate is it was around the time of Storm Dara that those incidents occurred. Sorry, what was your other part?
It's about when Terminal 3 will reopen.
We shall hopefully have an update for all. So we have engineers working on that currently. We have a timeline coming together. We should be able to update all parties probably in the next 2 weeks when we expect T3 to open. So at present, I don't have that with me, but I will do shortly.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think that brings our session to a close. I want to thank you all very much for attending this afternoon. It's been really interesting and informative, and I'll bring it to a close now. Order.